Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner.
Just before you start, I think yesterday I heard something like a cell phone going off. Can I please remind people within this auditorium to please put your phones on silent if you can't switch them off completely. Yes, Mr. Lubbe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Commissioner, before I proceed, I wish to place on record that my next witness is Mr. Siani. He is one of the persons that were suspended by the PIC last week with Mr. Madavu. I was in contact with the PIC last night, and my colleague who's representing the PIC, Mr. Pozwa, who's present, advised that there is no objection to Mr. Siani testifying before the Commission. In fact, it's supported by the PIC, and it will not in any way impact on the conditions of his suspension. He is ready to proceed, and he can take the oath. Stand up.
Your full names are Victor Timothy Siani.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Have you any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I don't.
You don't. If you don't, then do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you.
Speak closer.
Okay.
Mr. Siani, you're employed by the Public Investment Corporation as an assistant portfolio manager, non-consumer industrials. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You have prepared a written statement in preparation for today, giving evidence before the Commission. Is that correct?
Yes.
I want you to give your evidence from that statement, but do it slowly. The Commission and members of the Commission are in possession of a copy of your statement, but they will also make notes while you're testifying. So if you please do it slowly, and you can start.
Okay. Advocate Libert,
Sorry.
my copy is unsigned. How's your copy?
The original is signed,
The original has been
and it
signed.
is with the Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Paragraph 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. So I'm an adult male currently employed by the Public Investment Corporation, the PIC, as Assistant Portfolio Manager for non-consumer industrials. Save where the context indicates to the contrary, or where it otherwise stated, the facts contained in this statement are within my personal knowledge and are, to the best of my belief, both true and correct. I have, to an extent, been following the statements made by the witnesses who have been giving evidence in this commission, as well as following some of the media coverage from various media outlets. I do not intend to address any of the above directly, but to the extent that I may omit to deal with any particular allegation referring to or affecting me directly, and to the extent that such allegations are inconsistent with what is set out in the statement, same is denied as if specifically traversed. Before I set out my version and understanding of the matters that relate to the terms of reference of this commission, I would like to, by way of introduction, set out my educational background and experience in investment management. Furthermore, I'm going to set out the events that led me to approach this commission and give my side of the story. My education and work experience. I completed Matric in 1999 and passed it with 6 distinctions. I obtained a Bachelor of Business Science Finance Honours degree from the University of Cape Town in 2004. In 2005, I obtained a Bachelor of Commerce Honours in accounting degree from the University of Johannesburg. I served articles at PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, as a trainee accountant from 2006 to 2008. I then qualified as a chartered accountant, CASA, at the end of 2008. In 2013, I became a chartered financial analyst, or CFA charter holder. I joined Allen Gray as an equity analyst in 2009. I then joined Kagiso Asset Management as a senior equity analyst from 2014. In October 2016, I began working as an assistant portfolio manager at PIC. My investment management experience. I have researched, financially modeled, and made investment decisions on more than 1,000 publicly traded companies during my 10-year investment career. My job title at PIC is Assistant Portfolio Manager. Based on my previous experience, my role is essentially that of an equity analyst without the authority to directly manage company share portfolios with full discretion. My role at PIC entails making investment recommendations on publicly listed companies to portfolio managers verbally and in writing. The portfolio managers have the discretion to decide whether or not to implement my recommendations. It is therefore important to note that listed equity investments made at PIC ultimately generally reflect the investment views and decisions of the portfolio managers, general managers, and the senior executives. I believe I was the closest individual to the IO Technology Solutions, or IO, and Sagamata Technologies, or Sagamata Transactions at the PIC in terms of familiarity with IO and Sagamata's pre-listing statements, questioning IO and Sagamata and their representatives, etc. The next section is key individuals involved in the IO transaction. The main people who were involved in the IO transaction from the PIC include, but are not limited to, the following. The CEO at the time, Dr. Daniel Machila, or Dr. Dan. The CFO, Matepo More. The executive head of listed investments, Fidelis Madavo. The general manager of listed equities, Lebogang Molebatsi. A portfolio manager, non-consumer industrials, Sunil Varghese, who is also my line manager, my direct report. Assistant portfolio manager, non-consumer industrials, myself. And the PIC's risk, legal, and environmental, social, and governance, or ESG teams, represented by Chifango Ndadza, Sasa Fako, and Sylvester Sebiko, respectively. The main representative from IO whom I dealt with was Malik Sali, AEI's head of corporate finance and business development.
Before you proceed, can I just interrupt? We've heard the evidence of Mr. Madavu that at the crucial time of this transaction that he was out of the country. Can you just tell the Commission what your interaction was with Mr. Madavu with regard to the IO transaction?
Okay. So just firstly, if we're going to define the crucial time of the transaction, roughly, I would say, I stand to be corrected, it might be from about maybe the 10th of December 2017 up until about the 20th of December 2017. Now, my interaction with Mr. Madavo in relation to IO, the first interaction came indirectly on the 16th of November 2017. That is when I received the instruction from his personal assistant to attend a meeting with IO and IO's representatives.
What is her name?
Her name is Gugu, first name.
Is it correct that she has also left the PIC?
Yes, she has left the PIC.
Right, and you received an instruction from her regarding the the IO transaction?
Yes.
What was
saying that Fidelis Madavo told her to go down to the meeting.
Yes, proceed.
Tell me. So I heard through her from Fidelis that I needed to attend the meeting on the 16th of November. That was the one interaction. Then I recall having at least one other interaction with Mr. Madavo before he went on leave in December. I don't know exactly the time of that interaction, but his office is in line of sight from my desk, and he indicated to me that the report on IO that's written and eventually submitted to the PMC should be a favorable one.
Yes, thank you. Proceed.
Yeah. Okay. How equity research reports for final PMC approval are reviewed. So certain large listed investments such as IO require prior approval by the PIC's Portfolio Management Committee for listed investments, also known as PMC-LI or just PMC. 4 types of reports are submitted to PMC in order for the committee to make its decisions: an appraisal or equity report, an ESG, a risk, and a legal report. After carrying out my research and due diligence on a prospective investment, I compiled the equity research report containing background information, analysis, a conclusion, and recommendation on the investment. This equity research report is then reviewed by my portfolio manager, Sunil Varghese. Then it is reviewed and recommended for submission to PMC by the General Manager for Listed Equities, Lebogang Molebatsi, and finally reviewed and approved for submission to PMC by the Executive Head of Listed Investments, Fidelis Madavo. The reviewers read these reports in detail and instruct me to edit the report as they see fit. In my experience at PIC, I have had no control over the conclusion and recommendation sections of the equity reports that I compile. The essential content of the conclusion and investment recommendation sections are dictated directly to me by Sunil Varghese, Lebogang Molebatsi, and Fidelis Madavo, who review the reports. In many instances, this lack of control extends to other sections of these reports, such as valuation. Therefore, the most important aspects of the report, valuation, conclusion, and recommendation, are dictated by my reviewers. My lack of control over and final say on the content of the conclusion sections.
Can we just clear up something?
Okay.
Just a quick question, because I know we'll ask towards the end, but some quick question here is that in terms of the sort of the recommendations, are there policies with regard to that as the analyst or the assistant portfolio manager, you can make a recommendation and that is cast in stone and all that?
Yeah. As far as PMC submissions, I'm not aware of policies that address the recommendation and conclusion section specifically. So I've gone on practice, and the practice at the PIC in my division specifically, in my team, has been that the recommendation and conclusion paragraphs essentially are sanctioned by the reviewers. Okay. My lack of control over and final say on the content of the conclusion sections of PMC equity reports that I compile and the recommendation sections particularly concerned me in the cases of IO, Vodacom Tanzania, and Distel. My general experience of how the PIC operates when making investment decisions. I will, so that I stick to my experience, I'll say at least my department, listed equities, and in my personal experience. First, I must state that I was very shocked to have been handed a suspension notice on the 22nd of January 2019. This was very unexpected, as I'm a very small player in the bigger scheme of things at the PIC and in respect of the IO transaction. Following this, it became very important that I speak out, as I realized that there were forces that were working against me, and this commission could be my only salvation to a good name and my professional integrity, both of which I've worked hard for. Accordingly, I would like to give a bit of background about my experience at the PIC in relation to how investment decisions are often made. I would also like to take this opportunity to speak on behalf of my colleagues who fear to come forward and speak at this commission, because the general culture at the PIC is one of victimization and suppression of voices of reason. I hope many of them will be encouraged to come forward and have their say for the betterment of the organization. In my experience, sound investment recommendations by investment professionals are often ignored at PIC. However, I must hasten to add that there is a lot of good at the PIC. Having said that, I learned that the PIC's work culture is also one of intimidation, you don't question, you comply, ostracism, fear, coercion, and undermining the independent research views of investment professionals. Furthermore, PIC has no trusted independent whistleblower hotline that I am aware of. This adds to the anxiety of many of us to speak out.
Can I again interrupt you? Do you know that there is a hotline at the PIC?
Yes, I know of a hotline, but it is not trusted. I don't believe it's independent. Yes. I joined PIC with the understanding that it has a mutual mandate to generate returns on behalf of clients and to contribute to the developmental goals of South Africa. I believe in these principles. However, I observed at least one instance of a culture of pushing through deals that fulfill neither objective. For example, Sagarmatha and Vodacom Tanzania illustrate this phenomenon. I expressed my very negative view of Sagarmatha and stated that its forecasts were extremely bullish, despite a recommendation I made in April 2018 to invest in Sagarmatha at a price of 7 Rand 6 cents or less per share, compared to a listing price of 39 Rand 62 per share set by Sagarmatha. The PMC recommended the transaction for approval to the Investment Committee, or IC, which is a PIC board subcommittee. I'll discuss more of this investment later. In June 2017, I recommended that the PIC not invest up to 1.15 billion Rand in Vodacom Tanzania at 850 Tanzanian shillings per share, because I valued the company at 683 Tanzanian shillings per share. This was agreed to by all my seniors, and we signed a notification memo on the 4th of July 2017 informing PMC of this. However, on Tuesday, the 18th of July 2017, my line manager, portfolio manager for non-consumer industrial, Sunil Varghese, sent me an email stating, "We will be holding a special PMC on Monday or Tuesday next week in favor of Vodacom Tanzania. They have agreed to give us a put option of 680 shillings exercisable after 3 years and an underwriting fee of 1%. Hope you can amend the report on the weekend." Given that the PIC is a long-term investor and intended to hold the Vodacom Tanzania shares for a long period, more than 3 years, I did not believe that the put option provided adequate long-term downside protection for our clients. I communicated this to my line manager. After PMC approved the investment in Vodacom Tanzania, I was criticized by the general manager for listed equities, Lebogang Molebatsi, for not showing conviction for an idea I did not believe in. but that those in decision-making positions at PIC were determined to make, although he did empathize with me somewhat.
Question? That put, how many years were you thinking they should put it on? Because they said 3 years, but how many years were you thinking the put option should take?
Yeah. So my belief is that a put option essentially is insurance against the decline in the share price. And I believe that the duration of that protection, for it to be genuine protection, it should match the duration for which you plan to hold that share. And the PIC has stated that when it comes to investments in the rest of Africa, outside South Africa, they take a quasi-private equity approach whereby they would buy a meaningful stake in the company and then appoint representatives onto the company's board. That's the general approach. And importantly, they state that they intend to hold that investment for a long period of time, for long term. So long term in my mind is more than 4 to 5 years. And so I would think that option should have been in place and provided protection for 4, 5 years or more, for as long as the holding period is. Okay. Introduction to IO. On the 16th of November 2017 at around 10:15, I was instructed by the executive head of listed investments, Fidelis Madavo, through his personal assistant, to immediately attend an introductory meeting with IO at PIC's offices. I believe I attended the IO meeting on the 16th of November 2017 with my colleagues Sunil Varghese, the portfolio manager for non-consumer industrials, and Desmond Sibuyi, the analyst for non-consumer industrials. IO was represented at the meeting by Malik Sali, AEI's head of corporate finance and business development, Kevin Hardy, CEO, Sipiwe Nodwele, chief investment officer, and I think about 2 others whose names I cannot perfectly recall. My meeting notes have their names down as Walter and Mbuso. The purpose of the meeting was for IO's management and representatives to present the IO investment opportunity to PIC with the intention to obtain PIC support for and participation in its listing on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, JSE. These type of introductory meetings happen regularly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do I understand you correctly that you were instructed that same morning to attend the meeting? It was not as if there was a meeting arranged previously and you were asked to put it in your diary and that you will attend on that day. You were instructed the same day to go to that meeting.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that is the unusual part of it. Usually when we have meetings of this nature, we receive an advance invitation for the meeting. This meeting was not scheduled in my calendar, and so I had to attend it immediately. An unreasonably short time frame given for the IO process. Given the statement, I'll start again. Throughout the statement, I use the terms initial public offering or IPO and listing via private placement interchangeably, since we are dealing with new listings. To begin research work on a company about to have an IPO or new stock exchange listing, we as investment analysts typically study the company's prospectus or pre-listing statement. I requested IO's pre-listing statement from Malik Sali via email on the 17th of November 2017 at 10:04 in the afternoon. Mr. Sali only emailed me IO's pre-listing statement a week later on the 24th of November 2017 at 8:01 in the morning.
Again, sorry to interrupt. At the first meeting that you attended, was it made clear to everybody that it's an urgent type of investment decision that must be taken?
Oh yes, it was. When companies meet us, they typically give us a timeline of events leading up to the listing of the company. And I do stand under correction in terms of when I received that timeline, but I know that the timeline was for the company to list in December, and later on we confirmed that the closing date for applications to participate in the listing was around the 15th of December.
And the important point is Mr. Sali took a week to send you the pre-listing statement.
Yes. In this section, I measure the approval time frame as time from receipt of a company's pre-listing statement or prospectus to the date of final transaction decision, approval or otherwise, by the PMC. The estimated approval time frames and estimated transaction values for IPOs I have worked on as primary equity analyst at PIC are as follows. Vodacom Tanzania, 11.7 weeks for an investment amount of around an estimated 840 million rand. RH Popelo, 9.9 weeks to invest between 400 and 500 million rand. Sagamartha, 11.7 weeks for an investment between 3 billion and 7.5 billion rand. This is the range that Sagamartha sought. And then IO, 3 weeks for 4.3 billion rand. The 3 weeks is measured until the 15th of December 2017, the closing date of the IO private placement. According to the notes from our first meeting on the 11th of January 2018, Sagamartha management indicated that they wanted to list on the JSE at the end of January 2018. This would have given the PIC less than 3 weeks to conduct its approval process in order to participate in Sagamartha's listing. Because it manages the capital...
Question?
Sorry.
Just in terms of the timelines here, why was the IO transaction why were you guys given 3 weeks? Was the statement ready before, did they come late to the PIC? Mm-hmm. What precipitated that?
Mm. Yeah, I will deal with it later. Yeah. Because it manages the capital sought by companies, PIC has the power to dictate timeframes to companies seeking funding from it. The IO process was unusual in that it seemed to me IO was dictating timeframes to the PIC. I found this strange and untoward. On the 22nd of January 2019 at this commission, PIC's executive head of listed investments, Fidelis Madavo, said, "In IPOs, you have challenges in that people come 1 month or so prior to IPO and they want PIC to participate. And we have had instances where we have sent them away to say, look, we have a process. We have a 2-stage process where we need to do a proper due diligence. We incorporate other teams in what we do. Look, you want the PIC to participate, we have processes. If you don't want our processes, then we can come on board after you have IPO'd. I think we have said that. In my observation, what Mr. Madavo stated in the above paragraph was done with some companies. However, it was not done by management above my level in the case of IO. Investing without research is like playing poker and never looking at the cards." Back quotes from Peter Lynch. As a result of the very short time frame, at least 70% shorter than usual, to conduct the IO process, I believe it was in the best interest of our clients and the PIC for all relevant teams to immediately commence research into IO. As a result, on the 27th of November and the 30th of November 2017, I made a professional judgment call and requested our ESG, risk, and legal teams to allocate team members to assist on the IO IPO. The intention of my request was to quickly alert these teams to the fact that due diligence would be required due to the fact that there was extreme time pressure to conduct the IO process. Usually, due diligence exercises begin after PMC has granted approval for due diligence. Based on my experience, I was confident that PMC would in any event approve a due diligence exercise. Note that doing due diligence does not automatically mean that an investment will be made. On the 1st of December 2017, at 5 to 3 in the afternoon, I contacted my colleague in the company secretary department to request her to schedule a PMC meeting to approve due diligence at the earliest possible date. According to an email I received from our portfolio manager on the 5th of December 2017 at 20 past noon, a PMC meeting that I presume was scheduled for around the 6th of December 2017 was postponed. A PMC meeting was scheduled for the 13th of December 2017. This PMC meeting was never held. I believe I was informed by company secretariat the reason was a failure to achieve a quorum. It is important to note that the underlying intention of a PMC approval for due diligence is to ensure that there is sufficient PMC appetite for an investment to justify expenditure on a due diligence exercise. This is because some due diligence exercises involve incurring expenses for travel, appointment of external service providers, consultants, etc. However, the due diligence I requested for IO at that stage only involved desktop research without any additional direct expenses. Therefore, PIC's resources were still being efficiently utilized. Faulting me for following the spirit of prudent investment procedure by requesting due diligence work from the ESG, risk, and legal teams, which would have certainly been required, is the first reason out of 3 PMC has given for my suspension on the 21st of January 2019. Had I not requested our ESG, risk, and legal teams to conduct due diligence, no documented evidence in the PIC would have existed by the 14th of December 2017 that IO, in my view, was a bad investment. Whether PMC approval was received for the due diligence is immaterial to the substance and spirit of the process. I believe commencing research or due diligence, which did not involve the incurring of additional costs, as early as possible was in the best interest of our clients. At the PIC Commission on the 23rd of January 2019, PIC's head of internal audit, Lufuno Nemagovani, was asked for reasons given by employees for flouting processes and whether internal audit looked into that. Lufuno replied, "May I, for now, not respond to that question given that it is still a work in progress. When internal audit asked me why I requested the teams to commence due diligence work at the time I did, I provided the same reasons I discussed in the above paragraphs. I also provided reasons to Lufuno and his team for the second reason for my suspension, which I discussed later in the statement. The IO transaction was a foregone conclusion. On the 8th of December 2017, at 15 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, I sent the following email to IO representative Malik Sali, AEI's head of corporate finance and business development. The subject of the email was IO, PIC process. I wrote, "Dear Malik, as mentioned when we spoke, the earliest the PIC can make a decision on whether to participate in IO's IPO is near the end of January 2018. This means that the proposed listing date of 15 December 2017 would be too early for PIC to participate. Are you able to move the listing? Kind regards, Victor." After 6 days, on the 14th of December 2017, at 26 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, Malik Salih sent the following response. Dear Victor, thank you for your email. I understand that many of these questions were dealt with in the presentation to the executive teams by our senior executives. From my understanding, the urgency of the listing as a result of the impending contract with one of the big corporates and the need for black empowered ICT players is what's driving all of the urgency. I also understood that their support from the PIC executives in the light of the BT agreement and the growth forecast for Sasol and the acquisition strategy. I will check with Khalid and the team, but I know that the listing is definitely proceeding this year, and this was a critical discussion which was held with the senior PIC executives. This is just my view as a sort of a worker bee in the system, but I will check with Khalid and Kevin and ask them to give a call to the relevant people. Of course, all of this is way above my pay grade. Kind regards, A.M. Salih.
Can you just explain the BT agreement? What is the meaning of that?
The BT agreement. The BT agreement was an agreement between IO and its parent company at the time, AEEI, for IO to acquire about, I think it was about a 35% stake in BT, BT South Africa. So BT is a subsidiary of BT Group in the UK, formerly British Telecoms, and it's a IT communications business. And that was one element of the greater BT arrangement. The other element was for BT to transfer some of its business into IO as part of this agreement, so as to enable BT to become empowered. That was IO's whole strategy, that they had the empowerment credentials, and they would then acquire companies who are not as empowered as they are in order to bolster their empowerment credentials and so win more business and to increase their market share.
Thank you.
Malik Salih's delayed response to my email was typical of the dismissive way I and my immediate PIC team were treated by IO's executives and representative. We believe that this dismissive treatment was a direct result of the high likelihood that they were assured that they would receive the 4.3 billion rand from the PIC, regardless of differing views from my immediate team. The 14th December 2017 email from Malik convinced me that regardless of my own opinion of the investment merits of IO, individuals with decision-making authority at PIC had already decided that they would ensure that PIC invests in IO. There was no negotiation around the IO listing price. When companies offer their shares in an IPO, it is normal for the company to negotiate the IPO share price based on the demand for its shares from mainly institutional investors. The PIC listed equities team was never engaged to negotiate an IPO price for IO. IO approached us with a fixed 43 Rand per share, which we were not allowed to negotiate. When we questioned the 43 Rand valuation, we were told that the 43 Rand cannot be changed. In conversations with my portfolio manager, Sunil Varghese, and general manager Lebogang Molebatsi, I expressed my view that the 43 Rand per share valuation was excessive. They agreed with this view. How Iqbal survey controls Sagarmatha and IO. In substance, I believe, IO and Sagarmatha are co-subsidiaries of ultimate effective controlling shareholder, the Survey family. This shareholding structure is as follows. IO is 49.39% owned by African Equity Empowerment Investments Limited, AEI. AEI is 61.39% 0.17% owned by Secunjalo Investment Holdings, Pty Limited, or Secunjalo. Sagarmatha is 96% owned by Secunjalo. Secunjalo, in turn, is 100% owned by the Haras Trust. The trustee of the Haras Trust is Iqbal Survey. The beneficiaries of the Haras Trust are Rehan Survey and Sarah Survey, both Iqbal Survey's children. The perceived personal relationship between Dr. Dan Machila and Iqbal Survey. On the 4th of April 2018 at around 2 p.m., a meeting was held between the PIC listed equities team and Sagarmatha management at the PIC office. Attendees from the PIC were Fidelis Madavo, Lebogang Molebatsi, and myself. Attendees from Sagarmatha was Iqbal Survey and Takudzwa Hove. The purpose of the meeting was Sagarmatha had approached PIC to subscribe for between 3 billion rand and 7.5 billion rand in Sagarmatha shares in Sagarmatha's IPO. During the meeting, Iqbal Survey said, "I consider Dr. Dan a good friend." Now, I believe this relationship was the genesis and primary driver of the PIC's investment in IO. Dr. Dan signs the IO subscription agreement without PMC approval. Before 8:30 on the morning of 14th December 2017, Dr. Dan told myself and Lebogang Molebatsi, the general manager of listed equities, that PIC will subscribe for 4.3 billion rand of IO shares in IO's IPO. This timing on that day is based on evidence from a test message. To effect this, Dr. Dan signed the IO irrevocable subscription agreement and instructed Lebogang Molebatsi to co-sign it, as Lebogang was the acting executive head of listed investments at the time in Fidelis Madavo's absence. The subscription agreement was signed before 11:44, as Dr. Dan's personal assistant scanned and sent it to me at 11:44 on the 14th of December 2017. I thought signing the subscription agreement was highly irregular because I had never seen it happen before, and PMC had not yet approved the IO transaction. We raised our qualms: due diligence incomplete, lack of PMC approval, about entering into the IO transaction, but Dr. Dan overruled us. In an informal meeting I attended around the day of signing the subscription agreement, Dr. Dan said, and I'm paraphrasing, "I will use my authority as CEO to sign the IO subscription agreement and have the decision ratified at the next PMC meeting." Rubber stamping the IO transaction. Later in the day on which Dr. Dan signed the IO subscription agreement, the 14th of December 2017, I completed compiling the equity report that needed to be submitted to PMC for an approval, strictly speaking, a ratification, decision of the IO transaction. In the sections of the report I had control over, I expressed my negative view of the investment by highlighting the many and significant risks of IO and the fact that management's assumptions underpinning their IO valuation were very optimistic. Given that the IO investment had already been irrevocably entered into by Dr. Dan signing the irrevocable subscription agreement, my equity report reviewers, Sunil Varghese and Lebogang Molebatsi, in accordance with what I deduced to be Dr. Dan's wishes, dictated that the conclusion and recommendation sections of the equity report reflect a favorable investment recommendation for IO. This report was presented to PMC on the 20th of December 2017. There is nothing from my side that manifested support for the IO investment before it was entered into on the 14th of December 2017. Therefore, there was no common purpose between me, the CEO Dr. Dan, and the equity report reviewers. The ESG, risk, and legal teams emailed their completed due diligence reports to me on the 14th of December 2017 at 5:21 ESG and the 15th of December 2017 at 8:21 legal and 11 a.m. risk. My colleague in our risk team, Chifango Ndatsa, raised pertinent concerns relating to IO, such as counterparty exposures, Project Iris, governance, and revenue forecasts, among others.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. I just want the Commission to note that this gentleman will also be called as a witness.
PMC members were likely aware.
Question. You mentioned that the CEO mentioned that he can use his, he can use his authority to overrule you guys. Did he have such powers within the delegations, frameworks?
To overrule us?
On this transaction?
To overrule the PMC or to overrule us as individual team members?
Yes, you say Dr. Dan said that he's going to use his powers as the CEO to approve this transaction. Does he have those powers
I see.
To approve without going through the process?
To my understanding, he doesn't. Yeah, this is the first time that I'd ever been in that situation at the PIC, because the process says that PMC has to approve the transaction. To my knowledge, I understand that the DOA does not allow him to make that decision unilaterally. Okay. PMC members were likely aware that the IO subscription agreement was signed before the PMC meeting. The following PMC members in attendance at the PMC meeting on 20 December 2017 signed the IO payment memo on the 19th of December 2017. Dr. Dan Machila, as CEO at the time, Matepo More, as CFO at the time, Leon Smith, the acting executive head of listed investments, Winifred Setcheri, the acting executive head of legal, counsel, governance, and compliance, and Khanewe Adams, the acting general manager of listed equities. It therefore stands to reason that the above 5 PMC members were aware that the irrevocable IO subscription agreement had been signed prior to the 20th of December 2017. Given the timing and sense of urgency of the 20 December 2017 PMC meeting, I assumed the 3 remaining PMC members in attendance were also aware that the subscription agreement was signed before this meeting. Therefore, I believe PMC members in general were already aware that the IO subscription agreement had been signed before the 20th of December 2017 PMC meeting. And I believe whether the subscription agreement had been signed or not had no bearing on appraising the investment merits of IO, which I believe was the reason for the PMC meeting. The second stated reason out of 3 for my suspension was that I failed to disclose in the PMC meeting that the subscription agreement had already been signed. This insinuates that I inappropriately withheld information from PMC that PMC was unaware of. Note that during the PMC meeting, I was not asked whether the subscription agreement had been signed. I therefore did not deliberately withhold this information from PMC.
Just for the record, can you remember who chaired this meeting?
If I remember correctly, I think the chair was Matepo More, the CFO.
Thank you.
Okay. Conditions precedent introduced despite the IO transaction already being substantially executed. At the PMC meeting held on the 20th of December 2017, to approve the IO transaction, the following conditions precedent were proposed and accepted by PMC members. The PIC and IO entering into a put option to protect PIC's client against a share price decline, also referred to as downside protection.
While you're busy with that, can you briefly explain to the Commission what is meant by a downside protection?
Okay, so downside protection in this context means that the investor, the PIC, would enter into a transaction with a counterparty, in this case IO or its representative, in order to protect the investor from a decline in the share price. So what would happen is the two parties would agree that if the share price declines from a certain level, the counterparty would pay to the investor an amount to compensate for the loss in the share price. So it's essentially buying insurance for the share price falling. Okay. The second condition precedent was a commitment that IO will spend the equity funds raised only on acquisitions for growth and within 24 months. Third, the legal and ESG teams performing a complete due diligence and providing feedback to the PMC committee. IO implementing a conflict of interest policy. The appointment of independent non-executive directors to the board of IO, and shareholder approval for all acquisitions other than BT that are greater than 10% of IO's market cap. Specifically, I recall that the CFO at the time, Matsepo More, proposed the first condition, the downside protection, at the 20th December 2017 PMC meeting. I found this very strange, if not disingenuous, and irregular, because Ms. More was aware that the irrevocable subscription agreement had already been signed on the 14th of December 2017, and she had already signed the IO payment memo on the 19th of December 2017. In other words, she knew the IO was a done deal already.
So there was no room, if I understand you correctly, for the downside protection agreement?
I mean, there was, had it been negotiated on the day that it was, on the day of the PMC meeting, there would have been room for a downside protection agreement. But as you see later on, that the downside protection agreement was only signed in October 2018, about 10 months later. In my view, the downside protection condition precedent, as was also the case with Vodacom Tanzania, in a sense, was proposed to justify the unjustifiable. Investors usually do not buy downside protection when they buy shares. I believe downside protection is used, as used in the cases of IO and Vodacom Tanzania, suggests that there was little confidence in the investment's prospects. So the IO put option or downside protection was completely inadequate. A downside protection agreement was only entered into on the 19th of October 2018. That's between the PIC and a company representing IO. This downside protection agreement only protected PIC from a share price decline of 22 Rand, not the original 43 Rand purchase price. This meant PIC was unprotected for losses of up to 21 Rand per share, equal to approximately 2.1 billion Rand of PIC's initial 4.3 billion Rand investment. It should be noted that the downside protection period was only for 90 days from the 19th of October 2018. Therefore, PIC has been provided no long-term protection. This is inconsistent with PIC's stated long-term investment philosophy and the PIC's intended holding period for the IO shares. At day 2 of the PIC Commission of Inquiry hearings, Fidelis Madavo, the executive head of listed investments, said, We are long-term investors. We look at returns over a minimum of 2 to 3 years. I believe the downside protection accepted by PIC was inconsistent with sound principles of long-term investing and did not provide our client with meaningful protection against capital loss in the long term. In my view, adequate downside protection would have been for an indefinite long-term period. I voiced my objections to the key terms of the final downside protection agreement, but I was overruled.
Mr. Commissioner, is this a convenient time to take the tea adjournment for 15 minutes?
Don't you think we should rather finish his evidence relating to the statement and maybe take a break then, or would you want to consult?
I'm in your hands, Mr. Commissioner. We can proceed.
Let's proceed.
Okay. Applying IO lessons to Sagarmatha. Following the IO debacle, I became highly concerned that my name was becoming associated with an equity report conclusion recommendation and other sections that I had no control over and did not agree with. When Sagarmatha approached us to participate in its listing in January 2018, I informed my portfolio manager Sunil Varghese and general manager Lebogang Molebatsi that I would no longer be signing equity reports unless I could have more control over and have the final say on the key aspects of the equity report, the conclusion, recommendation, and valuation sections. As a result, on the 5th of April 2018, I compiled and signed an equity report recommending that PIC invest in Sagarmatha at a price of R7.06 or less per share, compared to a listing price of R39.62 per share set by Sagarmatha. I did this because I believe that Sagarmatha would not accept R7.06 and as a result probably abort its plans to list on the JSE. I believed Sagarmatha was worth closest to the bottom end of my valuation range of R4.39 per share, if not less. Despite this, on the 6th of April 2018, the PMC recommended the transaction for approval to the Investment Committee, or IC, a PIC board subcommittee. On the 10th of April 2018, the IC stated that, among other, PIC management should follow their delegated authority and decide whether or not to invest in Sagarmatha. In the event that PIC management decides to invest the entire R3 billion to safeguard the listing of Sagarmatha, the PIC should obtain downside protection for at least 12 months or beyond the US listing. It was not clear to me at the time whether IC approved a PIC investment in Sagarmatha at R7.06 or less per share, or at R39.62 per share. Meeting minutes also do not indicate for which price IC granted its permission to management. However, given that it was unlikely that Sagarmatha would accept the price of R7.06 or less, I was very surprised that PIC management still proceeded with attempting to conclude the Sagarmatha investment. Based on the fact that management was moving ahead with the transaction, in my mind, it seemed that PIC management was intent on making the investment at R39.62 per share. After IC approved the Sagarmatha transaction, PIC management then, well, let me rephrase that. After IC gave management to decide whether or not to approve the Sagarmatha transaction, PIC management then proceeded to attempt the completion of the investment. I witnessed some of the negotiations with Iqbal Survey, who offered some of his stakes in unlisted companies as collateral to back the downside protection agreement. It appeared to me that he could not muster adequate collateral. Negotiations continued, but I was not privy to the rest of the discussions. I only heard from a colleague that negotiations failed due to a possible FSB rule violation, detected by my colleague Tatenda Makuti in our legal department due to his FSB experience, and therefore PIC did not invest. Minutes of the IC meeting on the 23rd of May 2018 do not mention any of the events or reasons in the above paragraph. These minutes state that the IC declined to approve the recommended transaction when the PIC would participate in the Sagarmatha listing at or below the PIC's base case estimate of Sagarmatha's intrinsic value of R7.06. PIC's unfair suspension of myself. By unfairly suspending me and publishing my name, PIC has severely prejudiced me and caused me irreparable reputational damage in an industry where a trusted name is paramount. The PIC's decision to publish my name for the public's consumption was taken when the allegations set out in my letter of suspension were not yet tested in a fair process. Neither was I afforded the opportunity of a hearing before being suspended. It appears that the conclusion of guilt has been reached without me having an opportunity to state my side of the story. PIC has robbed me of my most valuable asset and source of livelihood. According to PIC's website as of today, I'm not aware of the PIC ever naming suspended employees in an official media release in the past. I believe this is a prime example of employee victimization at the PIC that this commission was established to inquire into. The third stated reason out of 3 for my suspension was that in an interview with members of the PIC Internal Audit Department in December 2018, I allegedly was not candid when replying to questions related to IO asked of me, and in so doing did not assist and or impeded the ongoing investigation. I would like to place it on record that this allegation is completely untrue. After Dr. Dan Machila resigned as CEO, I assumed that the PIC environment would be healthier and more open, so I felt free to voice what I believed and understood to be the case in the IO matter. Therefore, I answered all internal audit questions candidly and to the best of my ability. I believe the reason in the above paragraph was fabricated to justify my unfair suspension. On the 22nd of January 2019, the day I was handed my suspension letter, I sent an email to PIC's Chris Polwani, the Executive Head of Human Resources, in which I requested reasons for internal audit's allegation of my lack of candor during their investigation. As of this writing, I have not yet received a response.
Can I just again interrupt you here? When Mr. Polwani handed you your suspension letter, what did he say to you?
Mr. Polwani read me some of my rights, some of the conditions of my suspension. He came across as being empathetic, and he told me that he was sorry that this was happening to me. And then he also said that that there's a commission of inquiry into the PIC, and I can approach the commission and give them information. Potential reasons: I believe I've been scapegoated. In my view, I was scapegoated and suspended as a result of expressing independent views in the interest of our clients that run counter to those of some PIC executives, and being suspected of whistleblowing, which I did not do, and therefore not part of the circle of executives intent on preventing incriminating information from leaking from the PIC. 2 incidents illustrate the above. Sometime between September and November 2018, I received a phone call during working hours from a gentleman named Njabulo, who said he worked at the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA. He said that he was calling me to talk about a complaint I allegedly lodged a week before with the NPA regarding irregular activities at the PIC. I told him I had not made any submission to the MPA. Then he told me he was in possession of a document listing the aforementioned activities, and the document contained my name as the purported sender. I immediately reported the incident to my general manager, Lebogang Molebatse, executive head, Fidelis Madavo, and the then CEO, Dr. Daniel Machila. The CEO confirmed that the phone number I received the call from, in fact, belonged to the MPA, and Jabulo did work for the MPA. A week later, my line manager, portfolio manager Sunil Varghese, called me into his office and asked me whether I really did not make a submission to the MPA. I replied that I had not submitted anything to the MPA. Then he said colleagues approached him asking, paraphrasing, "What's up with Victor? Is he leaking PIC information?" I realized then that certain people in the organization viewed me with suspicion. On about the 5th of December 2018, PIC management called me into our Mapungubwe meeting room to provide input to the PIC SCOPA report. When acting CEO Matepo More asked me why I hadn't requested a PMC meeting to approve a due diligence into IO at an earlier stage, I responded that I didn't believe IO had investment merit, and therefore I initially shelved working on it.
Before you continue, that is now before you were instructed by Mr. Madavu to attend the IO meeting. Is that the period that you didn't request a PMC meeting? Because it is on record that after that meeting you did request a PMC meeting.
Yes, yeah, it's on record that I did request a PMC meeting, and for that particular record, the source evidence are emails of what I requested. At the time of this meeting with Matepo, this was December 2018, and the IO events had happened a year ago, so the events weren't fresh in my head. Therefore, my reply was not that I did request meetings, but yeah, I pretty much gave her the dominant view that I had at the time, which was that I did not believe IO was a good investment. Yeah. Okay. So in response to that, Matepo replied, and I'm paraphrasing, she said, "Is there a different way we can word that for SCOPA?" The group of managers then brainstormed ways of spinning a reason to present to SCOPA. I believe that moment revealed to management that I was too honest to be co-opted into what to me seemed to be a cover-up for the irregular decision made by the former CEO, Dr. Dan Machila, to invest in IO.
Mr. Commissioner, that concludes the evidence from the statement. Obviously, there will be questions by the Commission. We can proceed, or if you want to adjourn, we can do that. Okay, you don't want a convenience break, you still all right?
I think let's continue.
All right. My colleague, Ms. Marcus, will ask her questions now, and then we'll take a 10-minute break and then come back for my colleague Lediga to do so as well.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thanks. And just advise me, thank you for the opportunity, and just advise me if you want to, I think maybe the best is to just go through them one by one and get the responses. There may be some overlapping. So it starts with the question of, was this the only investment that you report where Mr. Madavo asked that the said report should be favorable, or had you had that intimation or instruction previously in relation to other projects?
Yeah. So the Distel transaction, essentially that transaction, I can't remember exactly who said it, but you know, it was, my view was that the price was too high, but then the pushback that I got that in the end overruled me was from those above me. And those above me are only 3 people, essentially, that I received direct communication from on a day-to-day basis at work. And those 3 are Fidelis Madavo, Lebogang Malabatsi, Sunil Varghese. Those are the 3 who are the reviewers. And those are the 3 that essentially dictate the final valuation, recommendation, conclusion. So I can't remember exactly what happened with Distel, because I think that was in early 2017. It's 2 years ago now, in terms of who I received the information from. But it could be any one of them.
But when you receive such an instruction, is it you who has to edit to change the views that you have, or do they change the recommendations
Oh, it's
themselves?
myself.
So, sorry?
Myself.
So you're instructed what to then say in contradiction to what you had originally written?
Yes.
Okay, and you complied with that in both instances?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I would tell them what my true view is, but I'd be told this deal is going to go through.
Okay, and then in relation to paragraph 15 and 16, when you say there are changes made and you do not have control over the valuation, conclusion and recommendations,
Yeah.
do you see them? Are they returned to you so that although you may have made recommendation or valuation A, is it then returned to you and before submission in any way to say this is what we're actually submitting? Or do you only see a final copy at the end of, so your report is A, this can be A plus, A minus, whatever.
Yeah.
Do you have any sight of that before it goes to further authorization?
Yes, I have sight. So the reviewer would take the report, read it, and he would mark, you know, what changes should be made on the report. So as the compiler, I would then go back and make the changes, and then pass it back to the reviewer for the reviewer to have a look again, and then he would then say, yes, okay, it's fine now. So I always have sight.
Okay, but it is then that your view or your difference of view is not communicated to the committee or wherever it is being presented.
Yes, yeah,
It's
essentially.
only the final view.
Exactly, it's the final view that's communicated.
Then the question for me would also be, are you aware of any other instances of where the approach has been, if we went to paragraph 78, I'm sorry, I'm skipping quite a bit. I think it's paragraph 78. I might go back elsewhere. This question of downside protection.
Sorry, can I go back to the previous one?
Yes.
To your question.
That's para 15, 16.
Yeah, your question about the valuation, being told how to look at the company, how to value the company. I recall from the Sagarmatha period where this is the time when I was resolute in not signing a report in which the conclusion was against my personal view. So with Sagarmatha, we got the evaluation in detail, we got spreadsheets, and we looked at the numbers, and we got the assumptions, and this time we communicated upwards to Fidelis and Dr. Dan that we did not agree with the valuation at all. This is in 2018. with the benefit of the experience of what came before IO. And we told Fidelis that no, we are not going to stand for this. And what happened, the message got passed down. Fidelis told us that Dr. Dan says that you guys do not understand this company, Sagarmatha. So we were supposed to look at it through different eyes. But in terms of investment fundamentals, it didn't make sense.
Okay, just to continue then, in terms of the 3 weeks, if we went to para 34, in terms of the 3 weeks and the timelines that were there and all the measures that were taken within the signing offs and so on, in that 3 weeks, given that you had attempted to do at least a desktop due diligence, what concerns did you raise in your report about the lack of time to do a proper due diligence? Was that part of your concerns about saying AO is not a good investment, or that we need more time to do a proper due diligence and therefore this should not proceed until that is done?
Yeah. In terms of times, it didn't mention anything about times in the report, but we did mention the risks. So risk of the investment that I mentioned in the report were such as there's a risk that IO overpays for the acquisitions that it plans to make and destroy shareholder value. There's a risk that their additional revenues that they forecast would not materialize. I said management's forward-looking estimates were very optimistic. IO strategy depends heavily on its empowerment status, and I said that empowerment credentials can be replicated by its competitors such as EOH and so on. So we highlighted the risk in the report. There was, in terms of, risk-wise, we pretty much said what all the risks were. I think sometimes you know when an investment is bad. You don't need weeks to know that. You can tell in a day or so. So I think the time pressure was less of an issue in knowing whether or not this was a good investment. It's just seeing the risks.
Okay, thanks. In terms of your para 50 and the message from Mr. Sali, is the interpretation correct that the rush of the timeline and the haste with which the IO deal was dealt with was solely in order to actually submit for a tender to get the BT deal? And that was the timeline, that was the pressure, and therefore was that deal already also a foregone conclusion?
The deal with Sasol?
With BT, yeah, Sasol.
BT.
Yeah.
Okay. The BT deal was not a foregone conclusion. That had to be sanctioned by BT Group in the UK. And later on, BT actually got nervous when it heard all the negative news stories about IO in the media, and it decided not to go through with that agreement. So the transaction, as to date, has not happened. Okay. On the Sasol deal, this came down to negotiation between IO and Sasol in terms of by when did IO need to have its BE credentials and have listed, etc., to have the organization ready to win the tender from Sasol. So we were not privy to the discussions between Sasol and IO.
But what I want to understand was that both of these deals from the IO side were in anticipation of the listing would qualify them to be able to tender for that, but they were not necessarily already, in a sense, a tacit approval that if you have done this, you're likely to get the tender.
Oh, you're saying the tender was not conditional on the listing?
No, I'm saying that it was, was the assumption that it was conditional on the listing.
Oh, I see.
The awarding of the tender would require you to have all of these things in place. Mm-hmm. Without them, the tender for BT or Sasol would not materialize.
Okay. So, in order to execute the B transaction, IO needed what they said was about R1 billion. And so if they had not listed and raised the 4.3 billion rand from the PIC, they would not have been able to acquire BT.
Okay.
One. On the Sasol, they were going to spend money on setting up IO to commence the Sasol agreement. So they would have needed some money for that. But they did not need anything more than 500 million, for example. So they didn't need the whole 4.3 billion rand to execute that transaction. In terms of a key reason they won the Sasol agreement is because they had the BEE credentials. And before the PIC became a shareholder, they already had the strong BEE credentials. So that aspect wasn't required. So it was more the capital that was required to do it.
And therefore, the reason for rushing the IO deal and providing this was for them to participate in both those deals.
Yes. Yeah. However, I mean, in my view, those things could have been delayed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, and then if I could move to I would move to 6, let me see if there's if I could move to 65, and again, I think you've probably answered this earlier, my question is who drafted and changed the conclusions and recommendations? Because in accordance with what you deduced to be Dr. Dan's wishes, were these dictated to you and you changed them, or did they change them?
Yes, it was dictated and instructed to me, and I changed the physical document.
And is that dictated and instructed on your original document? Do you have documentation with written instructions of what to change, or changed on the text?
No, the instructions are passed verbally.
Verbally? So
Yeah.
there's only verbal instructions about what to do?
Yes.
Okay. If we move to 78, are you aware in terms of any other instances where downside protection by the PIC was not done appropriately? Because here it's about what the duration as well as when it commenced, as you've said in section 7, in para 77. The protection is only for a much lower level of loss.
Yeah.
You've already got to have lost 21 rand. And are there any other instances where the downside protection is for much shorter times, inappropriately matched to the investing times, or for the loss protection itself?
Okay. The only other instance that I recall there being a downside protection-like arrangement between the PIC and the counterparty was with Vodacom Tanzania. The period there, I speak under correction, was about 3 years. And I mean there, because we intend to be a long-term shareholder beyond 3 years, in that respect, I felt it was inappropriate. But in terms of the timing of negotiating it, I believe it was negotiated and completed and agreed to before the PIC invested in Vodacom Tanzania. So it was proper in that respect.
If I looked at 84, the question of 84.1, the PIC management should follow their delegated authority and decide whether or not to invest in Sagarmatha. Is that a frequent response from the investment committee to say you've presented something but you decide, rather than the IC actually examining it and giving views on it? Is it something that is frequently just referred back?
Yeah, on this one I won't know, because this was the very first time I was in this instance in an IC meeting. So I don't know the record.
You wouldn't know if that was done quite frequently. Do you know what in 86, what the FSB rule violation was?
Yeah, unfortunately I don't know that one. Yeah, because at the time that it happened, I was out of the office at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But perhaps, Advocate Libber, this could be related back to Dr. Manning's evidence.
We'll follow that
about this particular investment and the comments she made about that the management often there's differences and so on. If you remember that part, I think
It's
it would be
noted.
useful to look
Thank
at that.
Yeah, I definitely think that's worth following up with the PIC to find out exactly what went wrong, because we also know that the JSE also at some point prevented the listing. So I don't know which one would have come first. PIC saying, no, we can't do this deal because of the FSB potential rule violation, or the JSE putting an end to it.
But can we ask from your side, Advocate Libber, that that gets looked into and we get a proper report on what actually happened there?
We'll do that.
Because I think there's a bit of a contradiction or a difference of information in that sense. And I think your... I'm sorry, I just want to look at... When in paragraph 95, when you say the CEO confirmed that the phone number I received the call from in fact belonged to the NPA, was that something that Dr. Machila had to hand, or did he have to look it up or make inquiries, or could he respond to you straight away?
Yeah, he looked it up, and he had in his possession correspondence with the Njabulo gentleman. And in the correspondence was, I think, his name, his email, and his telephone number. And Dr. Dan showed me that, and it matched the phone number from which I received the phone call.
Thanks, Judge. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I said we will adjourn, but my colleague is now ready, and I'd like him to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Marcus has asked quite a number of questions which I had, so I'm going to be short. Just a couple of clarifications first, and then we'll go to questions. In terms of meetings within your committees, you do the reports and all that, and your senior managers look at the recommendations and everything. Don't you think that it's a normal process within this kind of a company that people discuss the recommendation and they decide on it? I mean, it's not one person deciding that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is normal. So at the PIC, it's unlike all other asset managers in the private sector. Working there, my job has two components. One is doing run-of-the-mill asset management work, researching as an analyst, providing recommendations, and discussing it with my team. So my team being the listed equities team. And in that forum, we debate. All views are heard, and in the end, your view, by and large, passes. Why? Because that is in the confines of the listed equities team, and it really ends at the general manager level. So it's general manager down. So that's regular asset management. And opposing views are accepted and they debated and they go on record. Then there's a second component of my job, which is working on individual deals. They end up being very big deals in many cases. You have the IO of 4.3 billion, there was the STEL of 10 billion, and Vodacom Tanzania of near billion, and so on. So those are massive individual deals, often regarding IPOs and so on. So those deals go to PMC. So it's in the PMC part where the end decision-making authority really rests with the executives. And that's really the CEO and the executive head of our department, meaning these are the two individuals who don't attend our day-to-day run-of-the-mill general listed equities meetings, because we debate among ourselves. But when it gets to that level where Dr. Dan had to make the decision, Fidelis had to make the decision there, and we go into the PMC meetings, that's where essentially the views are dictated by Dr. Dan and Fidelis. Our opposing views basically are not allowed, they're overruled, because Dr. Dan's making the decision, Fidelis is making the decision, whatever everybody from Lebogang, Sunil and myself have to say gets overruled.
So you could well have some different views, but in the end, somebody has got to make a call.
Yes.
The management has got to
Yes.
make a call.
Yes.
And it's just a normal process normally within these types of companies.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, in the end,
Yeah.
in the asset management space, you have what they called a house view. And you know, that house view is the view at the end of the day that prevails, and it's the view that's communicated outside of the asset management company to the outside. So, and this happens at all asset management companies, the view that prevails in the end is that of the portfolio manager and the CIO. Analysts may have their own view that differ with that of the views of the CIO and portfolio manager. So in that regard, it's similar at the PIC. It's just that we feel that our CIO, which was Dr. Dan, was taking these decisions that we didn't feel was in the best interest of our clients.
And if risk department have a problem with, say, the valuation, I mean, do they have any powers to really be strong about it and say, really, we don't agree with this valuation?
So the risk department sits in the same position that we sit in, because we are on about the same level, and we then report up through the executive head of risk and into the CEO. So the analysts in the risk department, like myself, we have our own views, and those views get snuffed out by the time it gets to the executive level. I mean, I know of a colleague, for example, in risk, and I've known over time that the risk department has been one of the departments that has been outspoken against a lot of these deals, such as IO. For me, it was a conversation with the executive head of risk that alerted me to the bigger scheme of things around IO and the risks. And I have a colleague in the risk department who, a very upstanding gentleman, Chifango Ndatsa, is a friend and a colleague, and he made recommendations against many transactions. And he gets to see more transactions than I do, because his risk department services all of the PIC. He made such unpopular decisions at the PIC that he was removed from his position. And he's now in a position where he cannot be an obstacle to a decision making in the PIC.
Next one. Are you part of the department that manages 200 billion active management, or it's broader?
Yes, I'm part of the active management section, yes.
And you mainly do normal management and book builds and IPOs and all that? The normal part and the listings and all that?
Yeah. So as you say, IPOs would fall in the abnormal part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is the normal part which happens.
Yes, there's
all
the normal
time.
part. The normal part is basically buying and selling shares that are already listed on the stock market.
Yeah.
That would be the normal part.
All right. Yeah, I get it. Concentration risk. Throughout the days we've talked about 3 companies, IO, Sagamata, and the other ones. Was there a time when the PIC people said that there's too much exposure to one entity or, one person?
Yes, yeah, I mean, that was the high exposure to companies related to Iqbal survey. So from the side, on the unlisted side of the business, independent news and media, and then IO came in, and then Sagamata was possibly going to be coming in as well. So from that point of view, there was a concern about that concentration risk.
Taking another take, how do transactions come to the PIC? Maybe, from your part, I mean, according to you, how do they come to the PIC? Is it a bottom-up process? Is it a top-down process, or even a middle process or so, Am I clear?
Brand new transactions.
Brand new transactions. IPOs.
Yes.
Book builds and the others.
Yeah, so brand new companies who are coming to IPO, those would be communicated by whoever is the person behind the new company, and they'll get in touch with the PIC. I don't know who they get in touch with the first time, but I know they get in touch with the PIC, and often it's directly with Dr. Dan or directly with Fidelis. I mean, this is what I see and what I understand to be the case, because then I would be informed of these deals either directly by a Fidelis, or Fidelis would inform his second in command, which is the general manager of listed equities, Lebogang, and Lebogang will then inform us. It could even only reach me via my direct manager, Sunil, and then I would not know where it came from in the very first place. Often I'd have meetings with companies where Lebogang would call me and say, Victor, the company is here in the building and they would like to have an introductory meeting with us. Please come and meet them. And I don't know how they got in touch with the PIC, because essentially the deals are brought in and then they are allocated to the analysts like myself to start working on them.
Roughly, percentage-wise, what can you say in terms of how many deals are done sort of top-down and versus bottom-up, where people just phone in and say, I would like to speak to listed securities? Yeah. In terms of percentage-wise, roughly, yes, are the bulk of the deal done through the executives or through a bottom-up process?
Oh, bulk of new deals coming in.
New deals, yes, I'm talking about.
I mean, from what I see, the bulk of the deals come in from the top down. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to quantify it exactly though. But.
All right. In terms of pushing these transactions and audit, why do you think the IO deal was pushed so hard, maybe, or alleged to have been pushed so hard by certain people? Is there any thinking around there?
Yeah, I mean, I would just have to, you're asking me what I think, so you're asking me for opinion as opposed to fact. So in my opinion, as I mentioned in my statement, I think it seems to be that there's that relationship between Dr. Iqbal Survey and Dr. Daniel Machila, whereby Dr. Dan always takes a favorable view and is willing to help Iqbal Survey to raise money from the PIC in order to do deals, in order to raise money. And one version, which is a plausible version, is that, you know, Iqbal Survey has this big loan, I think in excess of R1 billion, that he owes to the PIC, and he's struggling to pay it because it's underpinned by a loss-making business, and he is trying to find ways to get money out of the PIC and inventing and coming up with different business ideas in order to do that. And in order to do that, he has to extract a large sum so he can pay off the debt on the other side. And that's, to me, what the case was with Sagarmatha, because the actual entity that was loss-making, the Independent News and Media, was inside the Sagarmatha entity. So if the PIC invested, gave money to Sagarmatha, it would have solved many of the debt problems that Independent News and Media had directly. So it was a bailout sort.
Coming back to our TOR's terms of references, you mentioned that the whistleblowing line is not an effective line, or somehow, you know, you were not happy with that line. The people from one section here came and said there is a line happening, they get complaints and they are handled. Can you give us some more views on why do you say that line is not working well?
I guess my view on probably most, or if not all, whistleblower hotlines is informed by what I see happening in society at large. You know, whistleblowers being victimized and not being protected first and foremost, and then I look at what has been happening at the PIC including what has just happened to myself. I didn't even blow the whistle, and look what has happened to me. Yeah, I just see all the suspensions at the PIC of executives, of managers, and all of those things. Yeah. And then after an IT executive, for example, is suspended and they do these forensic investigations, they are just trying to find whistleblowers and track them down and not do anything good to them. So, judging by the PIC's past actions, I did not trust the whistleblower program.
People are victimized within the PIC, and I mean, you mentioned yourself, you mentioned, you know, maybe one or two more. In what way? I mean, in what way are people victimized? Am I making sense in that?
Yeah, I mean, singled out for unfair treatment, suspending them. And then thereafter, the suspension naturally, when questioned about the suspension, the media finds out that there's been a suspension, and then naturally you mention the suspension and you do reputational harm to those people. Victimized, for example, the company secretary, she was suspected of leaking documents outside of the company, and I don't know whether she did it or not, but you know, she was suspended and was bad-mouthing people, essentially, is what it amounts to, which doesn't help in this industry.
In terms of the sort of reasons, the three reasons that you were given, you know, for suspending you, you are contesting them, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned that you didn't, you were not guilty or so in terms of that DD process and all that. So are you, I mean, have they accepted your reasons in terms of the 3 points you made?
Yeah. Oh, so the 3 points.
There are three reasons. There
Yes,
are three reasons.
Yeah, the first reason.
You were suspended,
Yeah.
and you have made counterpoints to those. Have they accepted those, or are they contesting those answers?
So I'll take these, I'll answer them
Yeah.
and refer to 2 stages of
Yes.
these reasons for suspending me.
Yeah.
The first time these reasons were brought up was in December 2018 during the internal audit investigations at the PIC. And during those investigations, all of us involved in the IO transactions were questioned, and I was asked about the 2 reasons. One, why did you initiate due diligence work into IO before PMC approval? And number 2, why did you not mention that the subscription agreement was signed at the IO PMC meeting? The internal audit asked me the question, and I told him why. The reasons what I set out here. I thought it was the prudent thing to do as an investor, to do the research with a very short time frame. I requested meetings, but meetings were not forthcoming, so we could not just sit and do nothing with regards to the work. The second part is about the subscription agreement not being mentioned in the meeting. Going into the meeting, I mentioned that I was aware that the PMC members were generally informed about the fact that the subscription agreement was signed. And so I told them I did not see anything wrong with that, you know, especially with the due diligence request. We did not spend money on the due diligence, you know. My mother said, son, as long as you do not steal money, it's fine, you know. There was nothing wrong with that. The due diligence was going to be approved anyway. I told them those are the reasons, and they've used those reasons still. They've used the fact that I'd done that as reasons for my suspension. So clearly they did not accept my reasons. On the part where I was not candid, I actually sent an email to the executive head of research and asked them for the reasons why they say I wasn't candid in answering their questions. They still haven't gotten back to me. It's been a week since more than a week since I sent that message. Oh, and now I'd have to follow the process of engaging them. That process is still in the beginning phases of going to them and trying to get my suspension overturned. Yeah, so we have not yet had word from them. My legal representatives are still working on that.
Yeah, so look, it appears that the culture there there are some issues with the culture there. I mean, you mentioned a lot of things. How would you characterize the culture, at the PIC currently?
I mean, there's positive there. People have good social, interpersonal relationships. Yeah, I enjoy that about the environment. The PIC does some good as far as ESG is concerned, affecting positive change in companies, investing in areas that develop the country, and also pushing the transformation agenda. Those are positives, and we act on that. But I just think that sometimes rational investment decisions are not taken on a large scale, and it would seem that the people in charge are not informed by the principle of putting our clients' interests ahead of their own interests. I think that aspect of the culture is what's so detrimental to the PIC.
Thank you. Thank you for your assistance. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just have one question. That paragraph 72 of your, the allegation that you failed to disclose that the subscription agreement had already been signed. Would that document not have been in front of the people at the PMC meeting? If so, was it unsigned? The copies, that is.
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure whether the signed subscription agreement was there with them. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Commissioner?
Yeah, can I just ask an additional question before you do? But if I understood this correctly, the chair of that meeting was Dr. Mashila?
Sorry?
The chair of the meeting was Dr. Mashila?
No, I think the chair was Matepo More.
Who had signed and released the funding?
Yes.
Already?
The day before, yes.
And therefore, there can't be a withholding of, or the question for me, a withholding of something that has already been given effect to, begs the question about whether people knew, but therefore the question would have been, what is as a chair of a meeting, what is the status of the business on the table? And it was, to me the question is, did the chair outline the status of the business that had to be addressed? Because I would have assumed that's why you've called the meeting. So there is a bit of ambiguity about what everybody knew, or the assumptions about what they knew as to why they were there. And so perhaps when you're looking at that clarity, just clarify what the meeting was called for, because it should have set that out, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, that's exactly the point I wish to clarify. There cannot be any doubt, according to the evidence of this witness, that the two most important people at the meeting, the chairperson, who was the CFO, and Dr. Machila, the CEO, at the meeting, were well informed of what happened, and it is really disingenuous of the PIC now accusing the witness of not informing.
You're speaking a bit softer or
sorry.
away from the...
No, the point I'm making...
Start from the beginning, yeah.
The point I'm making, and it was also the evidence of the internal auditor, that the two most important people at the meeting, the chairperson, the CFO at the time, and Dr. Machila, the CEO, they were both well aware of what happened and what the information was that was critical to this meeting, and it is disingenuous now accusing this witness, who was, as he's testified, the smallest role player in that meeting, of not providing that information to the meeting. I think that's the point he's making.
Thank you.
I cannot just leave this because it has come up, most times. And it's a separate matter, but since you work there, you could help us. The bonus issue, sort of has been a big issue, and it's within our terms of reference. Are you able to tell us, what problems were within the bonus issue in terms of, say, the bonus pool portion, and in terms of the allocations to various staff people there within the PIC? Do you have any views about the bonus problem?
Yeah. So, I mean, from the point of view of the staff at the PIC, the biggest grievance is the fact that the bonus pool, well, the cap on bonuses is on a declining path. So bonuses as a percentage of your annual guaranteed pay. I mean, that's the biggest unhappiness that staffers have had. I know that from 2017 to 2018 there was a decrease in the bonus cap. But there's no transparency in terms of how your bonus is decided. Even going back to the balanced scorecard, I mean, the way it's drawn up, it doesn't reflect the nature of our activities at the PIC. So it does not reward you for working on individual deals. It only focuses on your day-to-day run-of-the-mill asset management work and doesn't take into account the others. So yeah, staff are unhappy about how the balanced scorecard is drawn up and how the scores are calculated, and also the size of the bonus pool.
Do you per se have a problem with the balanced scorecard, or you want to keep the balanced scorecard but tweak the numbers?
I would like the balanced scorecard to reflect our daily work activities and take everything we do at the PIC to generate returns for our clients into account. Because a lot of what we do is not reflected in the balanced scorecard.
I see.
And so, yeah, you are distracted with these deals like Ayo, Sagamatha, etc. But then you're still expected to do the run-of-the-mill work of asset management, and it doesn't take account of the other work that you're doing, the deals.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Is that it for the day?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. That is the business for the day. And as I understand, the Commission will adjourn till, I think, it's the last week in February.
Yes, just for the public to know that it's our last day today, not last day of the Commission sittings, but this month, and we're going to adjourn until the 25th of February. If there is any change to that date, that will be made known to the media and the public on our website as well. But we are hopeful that we'll resume on the 25th of February. The reason, for anybody who's interested, is that I'm not available because of prior arrangements. That's the reason for us to adjourn until then. Yeah, no, don't worry about that. Mr. Siani, on behalf of the Commission, I want to thank you sincerely for making yourself available and coming forward to give us the evidence that you have given us today. I trust that that you coming here to testify will encourage other people who do want to testify but who are maybe afraid for whatever reason to come forward, and I hope they will come forward. We have means, the Commission has means to protect people who don't want their identities to be disclosed, and so your coming here, I'm sure, has encouraged other people to come forward. Thank you very much on behalf of the Commission.
You're welcome, Commissioner, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, we will now adjourn until the 25th of February.
I've made notes on